for those people who weren't able to attend today, and those will be hosted on the Keeping Bristol Safe Partnership website from next week. So the other bit of housekeeping to let you know about is that we are not going to take questions kind of by putting your hand up and taking voice questions, but we are going to use the chat function for that. So there's a little chat box that you can type in. So if you have questions as we're going along today, please do make use of that chat function. You can write any questions that you want to in there, and those people who are presenting during this session will be able to see what your comments are. We'll hopefully be able to just as we go along, answer any questions that you've got. But if we can't, then we'll be able to have a copy of those afterwards to come back to people after the session. So I think that's just about it from me. You're all really welcome. I'm going to hand over to Helen, who's going to start today's session on exploitation.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Helen Wakeling. I'm the Principal Social Worker for Safeguarding and Quality Assurance with Bath Council. And as has already been said, I'd like to welcome you to the session today. We have got a variety of topics being covered under this title. So we're going to have a session on adult grooming, on county lines and cuckooing, on radicalisation and fraud and financial scams. And what we will be doing is having a panel at the end of the session for people to raise any questions. But I know as you're listening to people doing their presentations, you may well get questions. So do feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll pick them up at the end as part of the panel discussion, because it would be great to have them there for us to be able to bring into those panel discussions. So we've got a variety of live speakers and speakers that have recorded their sessions, and hopefully the technology is going to work well for us. So fingers crossed. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Alan Mogg, and Alan is a team manager with the Safeguarding and Quality Assurance team here in Baines. And he's going to be doing a session on grooming, an overview on grooming and what that means.
I'm hoping that you can see Alan on the screen now, can you?
We can.
Yeah, just to let people know, I've got this on the maximum volume and it is quite quiet.
I can't hear anything at all, but I think Sarah's muted.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't hear anything.
Press your sound, Sarah.
Can't hear her either.
I can't hear.
Apologies.
Nor me.
Apologies, everyone. There's a little button I have to press, which I forget every time. I'm doing it now.
Hello, my name's Alan Mogg, and I'm a team manager with the Safeguarding Adults and Quality Assurance team with Bath and North East Somerset Council. Myself and a colleague, Alison Gerrard, have been asked to put together a brief presentation for you in relation to adult grooming. We oversee inquiries into concerns regarding adults with care and support needs in particular. So I just wanted to say that I'm sorry I'm not able to be there in person today to do this presentation, but I'm hoping to be able to join the panel for questions towards the end if you have any. So in this presentation, I'm going to explain a little bit about what grooming in adults, grooming is in relation to adults, particularly those with care and support needs. Although it's really important to say that grooming can occur, can affect anyone. So a lot of the things I'm going to say, are equally applicable to the general population as they are to adults with care and support needs. And during the course of the presentation, I will provide some examples from cases that we've managed in Baines, just to illustrate how it can occur. And then once I've done that, I'll set out some of the signs to look out for when you're working with people. I should also emphasise that in all the cases we've used, work was undertaken to reduce the risk to the person that we were working with. And then at the end, I'll just finish by saying what you should do if you have concerns with someone that you're working with. So it's difficult to say how prevalent this behaviour is because grooming is not one of the types of abuse for which data is collected. And it can be difficult to identify until a firm relationship has been established by the groomer with the service user or the person they're targeting. However, in one example, a study conducted by the National Autistic Society in 2014, 49% of adults with autism reported that they'd been abused by someone they thought of as a friend. The Rural Autistic Society survey of Merseyside in 2015 found that 80% of those over 16 felt like they'd been bullied or taken advantage of by someone they considered to be a friend. So, what is adult grooming? So the Campaign Against Adult Grooming have defined this behaviour as occurring when an individual or group of people build an emotional connection with someone they've targeted to earn trust, with the purpose of exploitation for their own motives. For example, sexual abuse, financial abuse, power kicks, or even trafficking. The first thing to say is that grooming can take place online or in person. In my experience, most cases we've managed in BANES have been a person ingratiating themselves into the lives of another face to face. But in one case that I managed, which was an online case, a service user who'd been talking to an individual they'd met on the internet over quite a significant period was talked into undressing themselves for that person, and unfortunately, immediately after doing so, the service user was informed they'd been videoed, and if they didn't pay the person they were talking to some money, the video would be posted on the internet. And this obviously caused the person significant distress and upset. I think it's just important to say that following the work we did, we don't believe that that video was ever posted. So that was, a positive outcome, and it helped to reassure the person. So what does grooming look like? Well, it isn't something that happens overnight, and it can take a very, very long time to achieve, but it is a process with several stages. And the Skills Trust website sets these out, and I'm just going to take you through them and provide some examples from the work that we've done just to illustrate them. So firstly, the groomer will identify a target. They'll scope out possible candidates, and they'll select someone based on the ease of access to them or their perceived vulnerability. Examples of this are perhaps people who live alone, perhaps have a disability, or perhaps need some level of support in their day-to-day lives, although that isn't always the case. They'll then seek to gain the person's trust by offering things like attention, friendship, or perhaps care. And in cases in BANES that we've managed, this has started through the groomer perhaps doing odd jobs for the service user. For instance, a bit of cleaning, help to carry shopping, provide a bit of company, just those little things which help to just help them just to ease their way into the person's life. So they'll then go on to try and fulfill a need for the person that they're targeting. So having made some headway in developing a relationship with the service user, the groomer will be trying to identify a void in the person's life that they can fill. So for instance, they might identify the person is very lonely, seeking friendship, or perhaps a sexual relationship. At this stage, the groomer will start to move towards becoming more of a friend, perhaps spending more time just in their company, perhaps introducing them to other acquaintances, thus making them feel befriended, part of a social group. So then they'll move to trying to isolate the service user from loved ones or friends. In one case that we worked with, the groomer started questioning where the person's family was and why they didn't support them in the way that they did. The person's family were concerned about their son's welfare, but they lived a long way away. But the groomer was telling the person that they didn't care, but that they, the groomer, did. So once they've sort of worked through these stages, they'll then move towards their end goal, which is the abuse itself. And then at the point at which the groomer starts to feel the person now trusts them and views them as a friend, the abuse may begin in earnest. For instance, as before, this could take the form of financial abuse, sexual abuse, radicalisation or criminal activity. So an example of this is the groomer may offer to do the shopping for the person or withdraw money for them using their bank card, and in doing so gain access to the person's PIN. The groomer will sometimes establish the date on which the person is paid their benefits and start only appearing on those days to provide some support or help. They may, of course, at this stage go with the person to collect the money and then take some or all of it from them, for services rendered. They may offer them a sexual relationship for money, but when the money's been handed over, the sex never materialises. In some cases, sex will occur, and this may lead the victim persuading themselves that the abuse is normal or even desirable for the benefit it brings. The groomer may invite people to the person's home who will also participate in the abuse, i.e. drinking drinks bought by the victim, eating food paid for by the victim, and taking drugs in that person's home. And then finally, the groomer will endeavour to maintain control of their victim. The groomer will work very, very hard to ensure that the abuse can continue. They'll tell the person how their friends and family don't care about them, and only they do. They'll remind them how lonely they were before. They'll tell them how difficult life will be without them, with no one to help them, make threats to them. These methods seek to play on a person's insecurities, fears, and perhaps guilt or shame at allowing themselves to have been duped by the groomer. The victim is likely to feel there is no way out. These steps, just to say, these steps do not always happen successfully, so the groomer may have to return to a previous step and seek to renew or enhance the trust of the person, or they may move on to another person. So there are signs of grooming which you should look out for when working with people with care and support needs, or indeed, in the general population. But the examples I'm going to use are from people with care and support needs. So these are referred to on the Ancraft Trust website. So there may be a change in your relationship with the service user. They may become withdrawn or seem troubled by something, but are unwilling to talk about it. So alternatively, their emotions might become more volatile. So someone who's in the past been sort of quite calm, relaxed in their conversations with you, suddenly may appear more anxious, more stressed, and that may affect their responses to you. Groomers often aim to isolate their targets from their family, friends, or professionals working with them. So if a person suddenly seems very reluctant to see you, or they refuse or cancel visits, it might be that because someone's manipulating them. You might notice through your support to the person that sums of money have disappeared from the bank account and the person just cannot explain what it was used for. Or for instance, you might identify a product that was purchased, for example, a TV, a fridge, a washing machine, but there is no evidence of it in the service user's home. The person tells you they can't pay for food or bills. There may be evidence of very little food in the person's home. The person might be spending more time on the phone or online than usual, but they won't say what sites they're visiting or who they're talking to. So again, as before, whereas normally they might have been quite open with you about what they were doing, suddenly they've become more private and reluctant to tell you what's going on in their lives. They start talking about a new friend or boyfriend or girlfriend, and it's not clear who they are or how they met them. So if you have concerns regarding someone you know or support through your work, what should you do? If you're providing support to the person, speak to your manager or your supervisor to share your concerns and seek guidance as soon as possible. If the person has care and support needs, make a safeguarding referral using the method in your local area. In summary, I hope this brief presentation has given you an insight into adult grooming, how it can happen, and what to look out for. I've provided a written copy of this to the organiser, which can be shared if you'd like a copy. And I've also provided on that copy some websites with more information. Thank you very much.
Okay, and I could see that people were having some problems with hearing that, so I do hope that people were able to turn up the volume on their computers enough to be able to hear it properly. So hopefully that has worked for people. And I can see the comments about people would like a copy of the presentation, so I'm sure that that can be made available to people afterwards. So we're now going to move on to an in-person presentation from Matt Dix. Matt works for Curo, which is, according to your website, Matt, one of the largest housing association providers in the Southwest, but one of our key housing association colleagues in Bath and North East Somerset. And Matt is going to talk to us about county lines and cuckooing. Over to you, Matt.
Cool. Hello, everyone. So as Helen says, I'm going to give a brief presentation today about county lines and cuckooing and some of the approaches that we've taken as a social housing provider to work with partners to address some of the issues that have been presented to us. I will try and work in some other examples as I go, but if there's anything that people want to discuss in more detail, please raise it in the chat. I'm sure lots of people will be familiar by now with kind of the concepts of county lines and cuckooing. County lines is generally seen as a means and an operational method of drug dealing, where drug dealers from city centres, typically London, Bristol, larger cities, set up networks in smaller, sometimes more rural locations, either by trying to establish a presence and building a network through local drug dealers there, or sending people from their own city centres, often children, to go to those centres and sell drugs. Cuckooing is a phenomenon whereby the people in those towns, for the purposes of selling drugs, identify vulnerable individuals who have properties and take over that property, usually involving some means of coercion as a base to sell drugs and to conduct that operation from. I wanted to talk a little bit about how we are uniquely positioned as social housing providers, as housing associations, to identify some of these issues, and some of the tools and powers that we have, which are, again, specific to us, that we can use alongside partners to effectively deal with some of these behaviours. I think we often have an insight as housing providers into people's lives that often other agencies don't. I remember my time as a rents officer, where I was able to identify someone who in distress, and as it turns out, was being cuckooed as a result of missed rent payments, and some of the structures in place that we would have in place to follow that up, phoning the person, doing door knocks, speaking to that individual. It's very much about encouraging that level of professional curiosity and embedding a safeguarding culture within an organisation. That means that people start to ask questions about what happens in those kind of situations. The other examples that we might have of situations like that, I mean, we as a housing association get people calling in to report repairs to us, the kinds of things that I would want colleagues do consider when raising those repairs. If you have someone repeatedly, for example, reporting a broken window which needs to be fixed, or a repeated lock changes, those really should and do prompt the kind of further questions that we would expect around what is happening with that individual, and often that's been the first way in that we or any other local agency has into identifying that person might have a problem, and that we may need to be the people who assist in that. I mean, we have tried to work very proactively with others. We are a largely Baines-based housing organisation. We do have property in lots of the other, even in Somerset, local authority areas as well, but Baines is where the vast majority of our properties are, and where our kind of local agency links are likely to be the closest. We made a decision very early on, as county lines started to become a phenomenon, to work proactively with our local police teams and local safeguarding teams to identify some of the individuals that we felt might be at risk of these kinds of behaviours, and to work to see that they were safe, and to both follow up and investigate, and to check in to see where those people were at risk. Some of the frameworks that have been particularly useful for that, the operational exploitation group that Baines have running was really an extremely useful meeting, where colleagues from a variety of backgrounds kind of came and attended, and where the information sharing was very open, and we were able to pick out and take things away from that, and to build a picture of what might be going on with a person, and to pursue that, to take that up when we needed to. As a housing association, we have a number of tools and powers that can be particularly useful in a safeguarding environment, and which we would work with the police sometimes to either support that action or to take that action alongside us. We've got a number of options when it comes to when we've identified a person that we feel is being cuckooed, or a property where we think that's happening. Our aim is always going to be to try and engage that person to understand what support they need and what their care and support needs may be. It's often the case, you know, as we said at the start, that that person is going to be subject to some level of coercion. So that empathetic relationship building is always going to be really, really important, and to understand that that person isn't to allay those persons' risk or fears, and to reassure them, and then coming forward that, you know, they can be helped and they will be helped, and they're not in any trouble. And in doing so, we're able to explain the kinds of actions that we can take for that person. It's not always going to be a case in the moving property. Sometimes there have been instances where people have been cuckooed, where that is the right solution, and we're either directing them towards emergency accommodation and then supporting them for more longer term resettlement, or in thinking about how the enforcement tools and powers that we can use against people who may be cuckooing a property can come into play there. So we have the power as a social landlord to use civil injunctions, and those can be really, really flexible tools that mean that we can provide almost emergency powers to exclude individuals from properties. So where a person feels able to support us in doing so, we would work with them to make sure that we took a witness statement, we understood what was going on for them, we put together something that we put in front of the court to include terms to keep any individual who may be cuckooing a property away from that. And where it's possible to do that in conjunction with police powers, we of course would do. But typically what we find as an emergency, as a very short-term measure, having something in place which the police can then enforce and pick up to keep that person safe and in their property is often one of the things that we've had quite a lot of success with. If anyone's heard of closure order powers as well, particularly where vulnerable adults are involved, we've found a variation of that order called the partial closure order very, very successful. So a closure order power would mean that effectively it becomes any person is unable to enter a property otherwise, that the police would have a power to enter and to arrest people in that property. It evolved out of kind of the older kind of crack house closure orders, the idea being if there was a widespread nuisance in an area, either a housing association or a local authority, all the police would have the power to close off that property to prevent that from happening. So it's a variation of that. We can request, so it is normally a police-led measure, but we can request with the police that a partial closure order is put in place. We've had some very good success stories with those, because what a partial closure order would allow to happen is where an individual is particularly vulnerable, they are not penalised in any way as part of that order, but it would keep anyone apart from them and kind of other professionals from entering that property. So it preserves their tenancy, it gives a bit of breathing space for other professionals to go in to engage with that person, to understand what further needs they may have and what further safeguarding is possible, whilst having something that's really, really robust in place to keep people from threatening that person and putting them at risk of abuse away from that property. And yeah, those have been some of the things that we've had some real success with. I do just want to, I think I've probably got kind of a couple of minutes left, so I'll probably go into some of the other approaches that we've also had some success with. We have tried with the police to identify a profile of some of the people that we feel may be at risk of abuse, and then to work with our local partners to identify whether there's anything more that can be done with those people. So when we're thinking about people who are at risk of cuckooing, it may be people that you know either through working with them in general. Typically what we tend to find is people in single bed accommodation, normally city centre adjacent, typically older men. Again, these are only very rough guidelines, but we were able to put together a picture of what that person may look like, match it against kind of any history that we might have of substance usage, and then to pull a list together of people that we could work proactively with just to check in and see if they're all right, and then to check that against kind of what other partners might also have as part of that. That is about all I've got to say at the moment. Please do put anything in the chat if you wanted to get some questions in. More than happy to answer anything at the end.
Thank you very much, Matt. That was great. Thank you. That's very interesting. And now we're going to move on to another video, another recorded session. So you may need to turn up your volume again. We'll see how that goes. But the next session is on grooming and radicalisation, and it's being presented by Steve Kendall from Avon and Somerset Police. So I'll hand it over for the video to start.
Hello, my name's Steve. I'm a police officer and I'm the Avon and Somerset Constabulary Lead for Prevent. Prevent is the government's strategy to prevent people from becoming radicalised, and it's part of the contest strategy, which is the overall approach to counter-terrorism in the UK. Prevent is a community safeguarding programme which seeks to support those that are vulnerable to radicalisation. It responds to ideological challenges that we face from terrorism and aspects of extremism, and the threat that we face from those who present and promote these views. Prevent provides practical help to stop people from being drawn into terrorism and to ensure that they are given appropriate support and advice. Prevent works with a wide range of sectors, including educational, criminal justice, faith, charities, online and healthcare, where there are risks of radicalisation that we need to deal with. The Home Office works with local authorities and a wide range of government departments and community organisations to deliver the Prevent strategy. We, the police, also play a significant role in Prevent, in much the same way as we do when we deal with normal preventative approaches to other crimes. The Counter-Terrorism Unit Southwest has dedicated Prevent officers who work with local authorities, educational establishments and other organisations to deliver Prevent training and to assist with helping to identify individuals who may potentially be vulnerable to radicalisation. Prevent uses a range of measures to challenge extremism. It includes supporting people who are at risk of being drawn into terrorism or extremist activity through the channel process. When someone's been identified as potentially being vulnerable to radicalisation and a referral is received, if it meets a certain threshold, that individual will be enrolled with their consent into the channel process. The channel process is a forum where their individual case is discussed, where support workers are on hand to provide support and guidance to channel them away from potential acts of terrorism. Prevent also works with and supports community groups and social enterprise projects who provide support for individuals who may be vulnerable and liable to radicalisation. The Prevent scheme also supports local schools, local industry and partner agencies through engagement, advice and training. And Prevent also work with faith groups and other institutions to assist them in providing support and guidance to people who may be vulnerable. So basically, the Prevent scheme supports people who are at risk of being drawn into terrorism or extremist activity through a range of processes, but the main way in which they do this is through channel. So what potential signs are we looking for in terms of individuals demonstrating activities that may mean potentially they might be drawn into acts of terrorism? Well, some of the things that we need to look out for are individuals who may be vulnerable through being socially isolated, struggling with their identity, or belonging or desiring to belong to a group that has authority, status and dominance that may have extremist ideologies. They may be expressing feelings of grievance or injustice, or feeling that they're under threat, and this may lead them to be radicalised. They may appear to be under the control or influence of others, or to have social networks where there is some involvement in extremism. And they may also be susceptible to some form of indoctrination due to their mental health condition or possibly other complex dependency issues, or maybe something as simple as they may be unemployed and they may be radicalised or vulnerable because of this. They may have a need for excitement or adventure where opportunistic involvement may fill a gap in their life. The risks of radicalisation are increasing. The biggest increased group are teenagers, mainly at risk from online radicalisation and radicalisers who use gaming as a way to attract young people. Prevent is all about safeguarding and spotting the early signs of vulnerability and providing support. And indeed, radicalisation has now been identified by the National Police Chiefs Council as the 14th strand of vulnerability. Those vulnerable to radicalisation are at a greater risk of being targeted by radicalisers or groomers in person, as well as online, through social media interactions and online gaming, as I've mentioned. People vulnerable to radicalisation may feel increasingly frustrated during the coronavirus restriction period. They may have sought to apportion blame for the pandemic on a particular group or community. They may have posted hate-filled comments or material on social media or online forums, or seek to influence someone else to commit a hate crime. Frustrations may boil over to violence targeting a particular community or group in what may appear as a chance encounter may have been planned or engineered. They may also have direct links to terrorist activity in terms of some of the hate crimes that they may have committed and referencing terrorist groups whilst doing that. And that's really important that all hate crimes are investigated and that these links are looked for. So how do you know if someone's being radicalised? Well, some of the things that we need to look for and be aware of are that individuals seek like-minded people. They seek comradeship generally in terms of the ideologies of particular people that share their same view. But not everyone does. There are individuals who act alone and are what is known as self-initiated terrorists. But some may seek glamour, as they see it, excitement, fame or martyrdom. Some of the things that we may need to look for that you may become aware of through individuals you know, through your work or through referrals, are that individuals have identified changes in behaviour. Someone's becoming very secretive, or they may have radical views or obsessive behaviour about something. They may be voicing extremist opinions or hatred of certain ethnic or religious groups. They may have a fascination with weapons, explosives, or extremist or terrorist organisations. They may have become very binary in their thinking in terms of having a them versus us mentality. They may have been rejected by their peers or family, and they may have a strong sense of grievance and may use to justify their extremist views acts of violence, which they see as justified because of the grievance that they have. They may have a change in appearance. They may be exhibiting certain signs and symbols in tattoos which represent extremist groups or symbols. They may use social media and have contact with online influencers who want to radicalise and groom them. And they may have mental health issues which are being exploited, although of course mental health issues on their own are not an indicator that someone is potentially liable to be radicalised. And they may be exhibiting posters or putting around literature or referring to literature which has links to extremist groups or terrorism. They may also be making, or you may be aware of, them making travel plans to conflict zones or be very secretive about where they're travelling and the reasons behind it. Generally, a combination of these factors are the things that we look for that start to raise alarm bells. Something very common in individuals who are liable to be radicalised is having a fixation with something. It could be with an individual, someone else who's committed terrorist acts, or it could be a fixation, an obsessive fixation with other terrorist groups or terrorist acts that have taken place. They may have an ideology, although this is not always the case. As I mentioned before, there may be self-initiated terrorists who are focused on one particular cause that's not part of a wider ideological view. The key thing about prevent and about radicalisation is that we need to identify individuals who are vulnerable early. Only by doing that can we prevent things escalating and prevent them from potentially getting involved in extremist acts. I'm going to talk very briefly about a case study from someone called John. This was a young man who was on the verge of becoming involved in extremist acts. John was often in trouble at school for low-level disruption and felt he was being left behind. When a friend told him that he was going to a right-wing group meeting where he'd made lots of new friends, John went along to support him. And John was soon invited to join a closed Facebook group, and he started to share extreme right-wing posts on social media and attending rallies. John then invited a teacher along to a rally. At this point, he was referred to the Prevent programme by the Teachers' College. He was appointed a specialist mentor, also known as an intervention provider, who helped him increase John's self-confidence. And John realised that he wanted to make some changes in his life, and with help and support, he was able to move away from extremism and the extremist group that he'd become aligned with. John was a young male who had a gap in his life. He lacked confidence, and extremists saw this. They saw his vulnerability, and they sought to exploit it. John was lucky. John was able to have intervention at a very early stage, and that's what Prevent and the Channel panel do. If you have any concerns about anyone who is exhibiting any of the signs or symbols or expressing any of the views that you would normally think would be extreme, then please contact us. You can do that through contacting your local authority. There are plenty of websites, your local police. We are very alert to some of these things that are coming to the fore now in terms of extremist activity and extremist groups and online grooming. And we absolutely have to take action very early on. So please contact us, dial 111, contact your local police, contact your local authority, contact your local school. Individuals will have had training within those organisations and they will know what to do. Alternatively, just look online. And if you put in counter-terrorism policing, a hotline, a confidential hotline will come up. Prevent officers work very closely with institutions and individuals. It's done confidentially. A lot of cases that they look into don't come to the fruition to the point where they are actually potential terrorists in the making, because they're able to act early and divert people. So the key message is, if you have any concerns, please contact us, because that early intervention is absolutely key. Thank you for listening.
Great, that was very interesting. So thank you for that presentation in his absence to Steve. And now we're going to move on to a presentation on fraud and financial scams. And this is going to be presented by Kirsty Langford, who's a member of the Trading Standards team here at Bath and North East Somerset. Can I remind you all, if you've got any questions, please do pop them into the chat, and then we can pick them up when we have the kind of opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the session. I'll now hand over to Kirsty. Thanks, Kirsty.
Hi, I hope you can all hear me, and I've tried to share my screen, so I hope my screen has appeared on your screens. Is everyone, if everyone puts in the chat, they can't see it, but hopefully you can see the screen. So I work for Bath and North East Somerset Council. I'm a Trading Standards Officer, and I work in the Safety and Standards team, and part of my role involves dealing with scams and doorstep crime. As you can imagine, since the start of the pandemic, scams have unfortunately gone through the roof, and we're getting lots more sort of victims contacting us, sadly, that have been the victims of scams. So the sort of areas that Trading Standards cover, we deal with financial abuse by mass marketing scams. We have links with the National Scams Hub, who are they work nationally and identify scam mail victims. We also deal with doorstep crime. That's people to sort of turning up on your doorstep, offering to provide services for you. They and mainly sort of, you know, tarmac and your driveways, the typical sort of scams that you've probably heard of. We run the Buy with Confidence scheme, the Buy with Confidence plus care scheme, and we also are involved with liaising with the police to set up no cold calling zones. So who's the typical victim of a scam? Basically, it can be anyone, unfortunately, but sort of recent statistics show that the average age of a victim is usually around sort of 72. Most of them live alone. They're often widowed, lonely, isolated. We often find that they're not always lacking capacity, and they're quite trusting. Unfortunately, when we go and visit them, often they don't believe that they are the victim of a crime. Each year, unfortunately, millions of people fall victim to scams. The current estimates put the total cost to consumers at 73 billion, which is quite staggering. The mass marketing scams that you've been talking about, they're put at about 5 billion. Unfortunately, most victims don't report scams, and recent surveys by the National Trading Standards Scams Hub have found that the reporting levels are as low as 5%. But the impacts on the victims can be huge. Sometimes people lose their life savings. Victims can often become depressed and lose the confidence to live independently in their homes. Sort of example of a case study of Frank. He would be a widower who lives alone, often responds to catalogue prize draws thinking he can win cash or a brand new car. These might come through the post. You see those sort of typical letters saying you've won a prize, and they're often addressed to you personally, so you think that it's actually directed to you. Sometimes money isn't requested initially, but if you do respond, the catalogue company sells on information to lots of other companies. Before you know it, more prize draw offers will come through the post, competitions arrive through the letterbox, and suddenly you'll be absolutely inundated with mail. If you respond and you think you've won a prize, then you're asked to pay a smaller fee initially to receive your winnings. Then you start getting several more letters requesting small amounts of money, and soon you'll be paying hundreds of pounds. So when Frank's responded, his personal details have been added to, I know it's not a very nice term, but they call it a suckers list. And then he'll be flooded with urgent letters from overseas lotteries, clairvoyants. Sometimes victims are persuaded to share their bank details, and payments ranging from £100 will leave the account, and sometimes we find that victims become overdrawn and they can't pay their bills or buy sort of basic food. Scam mail is targeted from abroad often, so it is quite difficult for local trading standards to sort of keep up with where the mail is coming from. We do work in collaboration with the national teams who are constantly trying to track down where the scam mail is coming from, but as you can imagine, it's they're always one step ahead. The Royal Mail must deliver all mail. They can't interrupt the delivery, so the scam mail will still keep coming to, even when they know that it's scam mail, it will be delivered to the recipient. Typical scams that you might come across are the recent ones. There's the computer software service scam, where victims are cold called and told there's a problem with their computer, and they're asked to pay money to get it fixed. The most typical one that you might come across is the advance fee scams, where victims are asked to send money for a range of non-existent goods or services. That might be through catalogues they have through the post, or they're asked to send money to collect lottery winnings which don't exist. As I said earlier, the National Trading Standards Scams Hub, we get referrals from them monthly for residents of Bath and North East Somerset Council. They send us a list of, they are able to sort of intercept post, and they send us a list of sort of chronic victims where they've been responding frequently to scams and they're known to be a victim of a scam. They often send us checks that the victims have sent off, or money back, and then we can make arrangements to visit the victims or the family. Often when we visit, we'll find that family members aren't even aware that anything's going on, and if they are aware, they may have only recently found out and they didn't know where to go or where to get help. There'll often be a significant amount of scam mail that's been responded to, and that then leads on to the telephone calls that they'll be receiving as well, believing that they might win. Telephone scams is obviously a real nuisance for a lot of residents, and it's becoming an increasing problem. Many residents are experiencing a really annoying level of unwanted telephone calls. The scammers are getting increasingly sophisticated in the technology that they use, and their sole aim is just to trick consumers out of parting with money, and the stories become more convincing. As part of our work locally, we've been promoting call blocking devices, which we have available free of charge for any victims that if you suspect anyone might be getting a lot of telephone calls, then we can fit these call blocking devices free of charge through Baines. So the sort of trading standards involvement, as I said earlier, we have a buy with confidence scheme that's promoting sort of traders that you can trust, so you're not getting targeted on the doorstep with rogue traders offering to do work for you. And we try and promote key messages to victims. If you haven't bought a ticket, you can't win the lottery, and your bank will never contact you out the blue and ask you to reset your PIN. The sort of typical messages that we're trying to get out there. We can also support victims to, we can go around collect scam mail. We link up with the Think Jessica campaign, which is was set up just to raise awareness of mass marketing scams. We've provided talks to a number of community groups. We have pop-up shops in local banks and building societies, just trying to raise scam awareness and offer advice. If you do come across any victims whilst you're out and about and you're visiting people, we can become involved. We can contact banks with the permission of the victim to prevent further losses. As I said earlier, we can fit call blockers, support family members and the victim to stop responding to mail, provide advice on doorstep crime, and refer victims to other agencies that we might have contact with. Going forward, what we'd really like to do, so it's been great to be given the opportunity to come and speak today, because we'd love to have sort of points of contact within different agencies and protocols for referring, because we often come across victims that are referred to us through the National Scams Hub, and we might feel like we want to refer them to other agencies. So it'd be great to have new contacts made that we can pass on. As I said, it's just trying to keep up with the new technology and the new scams that are ever emerging, and that's proving quite difficult. Recent case study that I've dealt with only in the last sort of couple of weeks. There was a lady in her 70s living alone. She was widowed. She does enjoy buying from catalogues, suffers from mobility issues. She's been unfortunately the scam of a romance scam. She was, as the gentleman said earlier, she was groomed and unfortunately sent off quite a lot of money to a romance scam. But following on from that, she's responded to a telephone sales call, and she spent £795 for to sort of carry out take out a guarantee on the appliances in her home. Looking around at the appliances in her home, I wouldn't say they were worth in total any more than sort of £200. And you know, she had quite an old microwave, an old TV, so she's obviously paid a yearly subscription of £795 through this to take out a warranty in case any of her appliances break down. We've become involved because there's another trading standards elsewhere in the country that are actually looking into taking criminal investigation into this warranty company. So we've been able to take a statement from the lady, and hopefully we'll try and work with the other trading standards to see if we can get her money back for her. Doorstep crime is, I'll just quickly say this because I know I'm nearly running out of time. This is another area, obviously people having uninvited callers, rogue traders offering gardening services, power clean your patio, etc. We often find that the work is poor quality, unnecessary, and the price charged extremely excessive. We've got a team of trading standards officers who we can pretty much go out quickly, and so if you do ever come across anyone where they've got rogue traders on their doorstep, we've got a quick response team that we can go out quickly and assist and get the police involved if necessary. And that was the Buy with Confidence scheme that I mentioned earlier. If anyone has any questions, I'll stay on and happy to answer them at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There was so much in there, I think, that we could have all kind of paused and talked through. It was really very, very interesting and informative, as were all of the presentations today. So thank you to everybody for presenting that. So we now have got our panel, hopefully. So there are people here that can answer questions. I will have a look in the chat, but do let me know if there are other queries that you might have. So in terms of questions here, oh, there was a question about, can I ask what Think Jessica is? Are any of our panelists able to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Think Jessica was a campaign, a national campaign. We have information and leaflets I can share with anyone. There was, it was a lady that was a victim of a scam, and she became absolutely inundated with scam mail, so tens of thousands of scam mail. So she sadly died because she just became overwhelmed with it, and her daughter started this campaign to raise awareness of scam mail. So it's just, often we find that I don't think she told anyone that she was getting so much scam mail, and the family weren't aware of it. So the daughter's trying to sort of promote and just make awareness of scams that are out there, because she'd got put on the suckers list that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, so she was targeted in terms of everything that she received. People are also asking about advice about how to speak to customers about the issues, and also advice on doorstep crime and call blocking. So where are the best places to go, Kirsty, would you suggest for that kind of information?
I'd be happy to help. If anyone's got any queries, they can come directly to me, that's fine. Doorstep crime is a really tricky one. It's unfortunately, there's lots of people, everyone wants things done on their home quickly. There's a shortage of builders in Baines at the moment. I'm sure if anyone's had any work done, they're finding it really difficult to get any tradespeople. Someone comes and knocks on your door, and it's like, great, we can start off straight away, but we're finding the prices that they're charging extortionate. We had a lady about a month ago, and she'd had a tree chopped down in her back garden, and the problem is when they turn up, they'll quote you sort of £200 or £300, and it will rise into sort of thousands, and they're quite aggressive when they're on the doorstep demanding the extra money. So that's the main sort of issue, that they'll go in low to get the work, and then the price will rise without you knowing it.
Okay, Thank you. And there are lots of questions for you, Kirsty. You're very popular. So the next question is about phone providers. So are phone providers supporting the blocking of cold calls to people?
Yes, they are. I mean, you can get call blockers through, you can get BT phones that do have call blockers built into them that you can buy yourself. We have signed up with the National Trading Standards to this service called TrueCall, and they work in partnership. And what they do is they collect all the statistics of the phone calls that the victim's receiving, and then they feed into the scams hub, and they can see sort of who they're getting targeted by, and obviously manually go in and block all those calls. So it's sort of one step above what you'd get on a call blocker. They just plug into it. It's like a small little device, about that big. I don't know if anyone can see that, but it just sort of plugs into your phone, and it just sends out a message, and they seem to be quite effective. You can also manually input in any numbers that the family or friends, so they can get through straight away. So it's quite a useful device.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And there's also a question just in terms of telephone scams over COVID. Have we seen a rise in those? You've mentioned about kind of tradespeople and those kind of scams, but have we seen a rise in telephone scams as well? Oh, I think Kirsty might have frozen there. Yeah, no. I'll move on then to another question for Kirsty. Did you hear my question?
Yes, sorry. Yes, it froze. I don't know if you can hear me, but it froze temporarily. Hi. Yeah, we have unfortunately seen a massive increase in telephone scams over COVID, and they're getting more sophisticated, and it's they're targeting, saying that they're from, I don't know, we've had people saying they're from the council, or you know, the sort of reputable agencies. So it's really difficult to keep up. It really is, because they're just absolutely constantly changing. So anything, you know, loft insulation, anything that's current, they'll say that they're clean air zone. We've had that scam recently. It's relentless, sadly.
Yeah, an ongoing issue. We've got a couple of questions. There's one about the number for local police prevent officers. We could certainly try and find out the best contact number if you've got a concern in regards to prevent, that you could contact them. I'm sure we could find that out, couldn't we, Kirsty or Sarah, and share that with people after this session. And there's also an interesting question in terms of, are women being overlooked as the perpetrator may be a romantic partner? So are we kind of not seeing situations for being potentially grooming because the kind of person is viewed as a romantic partner? And I think all of you have kind of addressed that people kind of find different ways of you know, getting involved with a person, don't they? And some of those can involve a personal relationship, which then leads them into that grooming and onto other things. So but it's an interesting point, and I think that is all of the points in the chat. We have come to past, so I just want to say again a huge thank you to everybody for being part of this session, and particularly to our speakers for your all the information that you've shared in a really short period of time. It's been really, really interesting. I really appreciate that. And Sarah has put an evaluation survey link into the chat if people wouldn't mind doing it. It'd just be really helpful for us to have that. It's only 2 questions, won't take a minute, and then you can all sign off, but that would be really appreciated. So thank you very much, everybody.